Welcome to Shopper Matters, a podcast brought to you by the Independent Grocers Alliance. And now your host, Michael La Kier.
Welcome to Shopper Matters, the podcast that delves into the dynamic world of retail, exploring the latest trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the industry from a shopper perspective. Each of our episodes features in-depth discussions with thought leaders and industry experts, providing listeners with actionable strategies to thrive in today's omnichannel landscape. I'm your host, Michael La Kier, the Vice President of Brand Development for the Independent Grocers Alliance. IGA is the world's largest global grocery network with well over 7,500 retail stores in more than 30 countries, commonwealths, and territories. Whether you're a brand manager, a retailer, or just passionate about the future of omnichannel marketing, the Shopper Matters podcast is here to share knowledge from the front lines of the industry and spark new ideas. Before we get started, please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you can get each episode as it is released. So let's dive into and uncover what really drives success in today's dynamic retail industry. Let's talk about what matters today. Today's guest is somebody who sits right at that intersection of behavioral science and shopper activation. Lynn Neal is the Global Practice Officer at Sellcheck, a company that uses proven behavioral science techniques and artificial intelligence to optimize creative effectiveness, drive better communication, and drive conversion for world-leading brands and retailers. Welcome, Lynn.
It's great to be with you, Michael.
So I'd love to start with you. So tell us a little bit about your background. What drew you into understanding how people make decisions, how they think, and where did that journey lead you from CPG brand work into Sellcheck?
Oh, great. It's been a wonderful career. Most of my career has been at Procter Gamble, had 33 years there. And over that time, I was in sales and also in marketing. And we had this really cool capability called shopper psychology. That was getting into how people think in their decisions. And I was in a shopper marketing function at the time and got exposed to it. And it really felt like a cheat code. It was just amazing that by understanding how people were thinking in the context of shopping, we could apply it to our work. And not only did our brands benefit, but the retailers could see the benefit as well. So I became really passionate about that work, and through Procter Gamble invested more in that understanding, and it's led to a natural career of really pursuing the shopper psychology, behavioral science in the context of retail, and put it together with Sellcheck. Now, helping brands and companies apply that to their work.
So I think all of our listeners would love a cheat code, right? And as you said, that's a powerful combination of coming from the brand side and really understanding the shopper. So I'd love to explore as we talk today, that perspective and how it translates into the real influence across the that mythical shopper journey. So let's stay on the topic of behavioral science. So let's learn more about why applying it is so valuable to marketers today. What's your take on that?
Well, the cool thing about behavioral science is it really captures what the shopper's actually doing under real world constraints that we all face, that they all face. It's going to be limited time, it's going to be limited attention, and just in general, a cognitive overload. So through behavioral science, we're getting real.
So hold on there. Let's explain cognitive overload for those not familiar with behavioral science.
Yeah, well, we experience it all the time. Think of everything that you're doing, in your life, day in, day out, and it feels just too much. Sometimes you just want to tune out the noise. And what happens, in our lives, in our shopping context, our brain is working to reduce that load. And so without even knowing it, we're kind of tossing things out that don't matter. What happens when we're talking to shoppers in like interviews or surveys is all of a sudden the shopper becomes thoughtful about their process. And here's what I think and feel. But that cognitive load that they're experiencing while shopping is ever present. And the brain is constantly trying to simplify those decisions without us even knowing that it's happening.
Okay, well, definitely I have experienced cognitive overload on a daily basis, if not hourly.
Yeah, that's right. It's and we're put in this context all the time where the decisions our brain is trying to simplify it, and especially in retail where we're making fast decisions, there might be a lot of visual noise around us, and the brain just wants to simplify. So when we're working with clients, we through a structured process to understand how that brain's thinking, we can really help capture, what matters, what doesn't, and help place the client's activities into a mode that's going to be far more productive when they put it out there in the real world.
So you mentioned a couple specific comments there: structured, process, and mode. So can you explain a little bit more what you mean by those?
Oh, yeah, great. So I'll talk about structured process first and kind of that mode of application. A lot of times we've all in our careers have been exposed to creative, whether it's above the line like television, radio, or whether we call below the line, which is about shopper conversion. And you hear the responses be, well, I like it, or I'm not so sure, or it feels this, and it's kind of, well, what do you do with it? Well, when I talk about a structured process, it's, well, let's have a methodology that looks at this. And what we do on our end is we use a combination of human vision AI. So people might be familiar with heat map outputs they see on where that initial attention is going to go. But then we have a human intelligence process that says, okay, we understand where the instinctive eye is going to go with heat mapping, et cetera. Now let's provide some algorithms, some thinking, some real world experience and behavioral science knowledge to come up with solutions. I think it's akin to how we think about an expert medical panel. They're using all the data and tools that they have available, but in the end, you want to be able to converge on, what does the patient need and what's a course of action going forward. And we talked about the mode. So context matters so much. It's that understanding of what is the shopper's mindset in this process. Are they cruising on their phone, or are they walking through, the aisles of a store with a list either in their mind or in hand? And that mode makes a really big difference on how we might get their initial attention, and then how we tell our story in a simple and clear way that's compelling.
Interesting. So we talked about the process, we talked about the shopping mode. So how shoppers make decisions is something we love to explore within this podcast. So based on your experience, 30 plus years at P&G, now a long tenure at Sellcheck, what's the single biggest misunderstanding that marketers have about how shoppers actually make purchase decisions?
Yeah, I think the single biggest understanding is that we believe as marketers, as brand people, and I've been in that chair myself, is we believe that our shopper is very deliberate and thoughtful in their decisions. We're going, okay, they want to engage in their brand. They want to hear everything that we're telling them so that they can make a well-informed choice. And honestly, it's our shopper mindset and our human operating system are constantly trying to simplify. So we're walking through the grocery store, eliminating all these things that aren't in our consideration set so we can choose amongst a narrow one. So we're not that deliberate. We're often shopping on habit, rules of thumb, previous patterns, and it's really a narrow window to try to get into that consideration set. So the biggest misunderstanding is that we think shoppers are really deliberate when actually they're trying to be good enough, fast enough, and keep the whole process simple.
So that leads into something that we've talked about before, kind of that shoppers don't always make rational decisions. I think about last time I went grocery shopping, I was hungry, right? So I ended up buying and bringing home a lot more stuff than I wanted. In fact, I'll go ahead and admit to this today, that last time I was shopping, I bought 2 bags of chips, right? They were on sale. And then there was a deal that I thought it was like, if you buy 2, you get 3 free. You get the third one free. And it ended up,
crazy.
You bought 2, you got 3 free. So I came home with 5 bags of chips, and I was not ever intending to do that. So can you speak about sort of the rational mindset that we think as marketers, shoppers have versus the actual mindset that we have?
Yeah, no, it really is important on the when we're thinking about marketers and we're building our brand and everything, we're really kind of forming some memory patterns that they have, what the brand means to people out there in general, what it means to me in particular. We're carrying on. When we're in that shopping environment, what you can never let go of is the idea of the immediacy of the context. For all the things that have happened outside of this retail moment, you have, but for lack of better terms, a fight going on in the aisle between products that might be able to get the shopper's attention. So there's an immediacy about what we need. You mentioned one that was a compelling price. You were hungry and you said, boy, I'm hungry for something. There are chips right here. Oh, I've got this deal, so I'm going to choose this one. I'm doing it. But you can think of the context of all the things we've just had, like Super Bowl on that we're doing, all the Olympics on there, on that moment that you can kind of tap into the behavioral science of, they might not be thinking Super Bowl while they're walking that aisle, but all of a sudden you trigger a memory that says, gosh, Super Bowls need this, 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 and this. And you're able to close in and go, oh, that's right. That's something I didn't know that I needed at this moment in time, but you're providing the right context at the right moment in time and that immediacy to get that closure of the sale.
So that makes a ton of sense. And we've used some examples already about in-store. Mm-hmm. But in a world where shoppers discover and purchase across online, mobile, and in-store, how should category and brand teams think about impulse differently?
Well, it's really wild right now. We used to, I said, have all the traditional truths, but now every moment is a shopping moment. So there can just be any kind of contextual triggers. Not only is it just someone, screening through their phone or doing deliberate searches or happen to be in store. It could be you're just having a conversation with a friend and you see something or you mention something. You don't have to make a note of that or remember to get home. You can go, wait a minute. Is this it? Is this what I'm looking for? Every moment is a shopping moment. Waiting to pick up the kids from school is a shopping moment that you do. What we find that we do a lot of work with key visuals now. And the reason I start there is because there has to be some linking tissue, the red thread that runs through the brand's interactions with their targeted shopper. So that might be whatever their visual hook is, whatever their bold claim, however they visualize their brand and make it relevant. So on all these impulse moments that we have, it's going to be seen and then be recognized. And then the nuance comes into what's going to compel the shopper to choose me right now and what options do they have? And so one of the analogies I'll use, we often think about, a path to purchase, and that's still relevant, but I think it's a powerful way to think about the shopper journey or path right now to just be a construct of lily pads in the pond. And at every lily pad the shopper might be on, they have choices. They can buy now, they can engage deeper, they can leave the process. And I think as marketers, when you go, all right, here's how am I getting them in, or how am I being considered while they're on that lily pad? And then how am I helping them so that they're either going deeper or purchasing right now? And so in that impulse moment, it might be on the phone. You've got your key visual. It's very simple, but it might be I'm giving them a button to purchase now that they need to go do. Whereas that same message on a billboard might be that I need them to exit in 2 miles. In the store, it might be that I need a little depth of sale because I got my competition right beside me. So after I get their attention, I help make sure they know that I'm the right choice. It's that nuance and that fragmenting on each one of those lily pads, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And we actually, on a previous podcast episode, we were talking about insights with Scott Hanbury from Clorox, and he used an analogy of the swamp and forest ecosystem. So I'm glad we're like staying consistent.
We're all getting back to nature on our shopper journeys.
That's right. So from what you said about the key visual and then sort of mapping out where the communication is of what's needed. So is that an emerging best practice of let's get the main core message right and then understand the context?
Yeah, it really is. I'll go back sort of even farther. Below the line marketing a lot of times often didn't get assessed and optimized because it was happening at a fast pace. You'd have internal debates. You weren't investing really the big money like in your TV advertising. And in the end, something went to market because someone most senior said, this is what we're going to do, or you just ran out of time. Hey guys, we're up against our timeline.
I'm guilty of both of those.
Yeah, we're going to miss our print window. if we don't do this. So, what we've seen in our business is a best practice is companies starting with their key visual and saying, gosh, we got 3 routes that we might go. And they use our structured process to help them kind of identify the route that might be most viable, most productive, and flexible. Okay, so they're starting from, all right, we've got a solid base here on where we're going to go. And then it's very pragmatic decisions on where they evaluate and optimize going from there. It wouldn't be every piece, for example, but they go, hey, we're looking at our marketing plan, and we're gonna have 3 big bets in our media plan for this, and it's here, here, and here. And they'll make sure that they do a check on those. Now we take the key visual. Let's provide it in context. Here might be the supplemental messaging that we have on it, and they'll do a spot check on those. In a very practical, if I put it in a physical store environment, there might be some grand display, and it might have someone hosting it, giving out samples. Well, you and I both know in our experience that you can design that, but you're not going to have that in 500 locations on doing this. Right. You might have it in 5 out here. So let's find out where we're going to really put our biggest investment in that we're intending on most shoppers to see, whether it's digital, whether it's in store, et cetera. And let's make sure we're getting that right and that it's working as hard as it can to drive the action we want.
And then we can do the other stuff or translate it to other things. But yeah, I think I've seen lots of issues happen when here's 5 pieces of creative and you're trying to optimize each one. And then you're quite frankly spending a ton of effort on, details for individual things that are then not as important when you're looking at getting the top thing right.
Exactly. I mean, it's be pragmatic about it. Get that umbrella with your key visual, and then where you're going to invest the most money, and make sure those are working harder, and you can extrapolate some of the learnings of that to some of the smaller executions. Absolutely.
Yeah. So is there a common pattern or in the sort of language of behavioral science bias that you see across categories or with brands when brands misunderstand they think they're talking to consumers, but really they should be talking to shoppers?
Yeah, there is a definite bias. The bias for the shopper is really based on habit or their default biases, and they dominate far more than brands assuming that context. When you do consumers in research, they'll talk about their higher order of values, their personal taste, or their identity. When you're speaking to shoppers in that shopper moment, shopper context, they're going to end up reaching for what's familiar, easy to locate, and is not difficult to process. Remember, we talked about this brain load. They're really looking for mental shortcuts. And I'll give a little science soundbite on this one. Our brain is only 2% of our body weight, but can consume up to 20% of our energy. And so why that's important for people.
Wait, hold on. Let me think about that and use some of that energy. No.
Okay. Well, that's it. If you kind of go, okay, well, how does my brain work without me knowing it? I'll take us all back to when we were in high school or in college or something, and you had that 2-hour exam. You come out of that exam and you feel exhausted. And that exhaustion is real. Even though you might be sitting at a desk, sitting in a chair, it's because you have put your brain into this mode where it's having to consume a lot of energy. Okay, and if every hour of our day was like a 2-hour exam, we wouldn't make it to lunchtime. So what our human operating system is doing without us even knowing it is trying to dumb our lives down. It's trying to simplify. And so instead of thinking about something deeply, it's going to make good enough decisions that are really fast. They lean on our habits. They lean what we exposed to in past. They lean on our memories. And it'll say, all right, this is good enough and it's fast and it's quick. And we shop in that mode just so we can be fast decision makers and get on with our lives.
Yeah, so as you know from prior conversations, I'm a big fan of behavioral science, and kind of what you just talked about is that's satisficing, right? I'm going to do just enough to make my life easier and make the right, not the right decision, but a right decision.
Right. Good enough, fast enough. And if you don't believe in this, if you'd like to think you're more deliberate in your decisions, there are some things we've experienced in our own lives that really drive the point home. If you take yourself back to when you learned to drive and how complicated that was, and everything was an action on doing it. Now we can drive and talk on the phone. We can do it. Everything is habituated. to what we do and how we do it. We don't even think about our patterns. And they're so habituated that if you have a drive home somewhere that you regularly take, you're going from your office to home or whatever that, and you have some new errand. You know what? I need to stop at exit 33 and get. And you'll be driving along and you pass exit 33. And that's because your brain has gone into this simplification mode. It says, I know this habit. We're driving home. Drive home. And it's just really hard to literally take that detour off the habit when your brain wants to keep it simple.
Yeah, so I love that. So I can now tell my wife there's a behavioral science reason why I forgot to do that errand.
Science made me do this.
Right. Yeah, I was not in control at all, so it's not my fault. It's not that I wasn't listening. It's my
this is why
behavioral science took over.
Bags of potato chips at home is because science made me do it.
Yeah. So let's get back to marketing, and kind of the genesis of creative really starts with hopefully a creative brief and a solid creative brief. Yeah. So if you think about kind of our listeners, how can you, based on what you know about behavioral science and shopper effectiveness for messaging, how can you help them ensure they're not missing the mark when it comes to creative briefs, and especially, like you said, in the shopping environment where visual noise is so high? What are some things that have missed the mark, and how do we fix that?
Yeah. Well, a couple of thoughts. I think we're all, when we think about creative brief, we all go, well, I know how to do that. I've either written one or I've received one and do it. There's really power in a good, clear, thoughtful creative brief. So a couple of things that I'll zero in on is really make sure your communication objectives are thoughtful. And we'd like to think that we're always doing that. We're driving sales or something, but no, think about that shopper at that lily pad decision moment. Right. And you either want them to buy or go or go deeper. So what do I want this execution to make the shopper, think, believe, so I'm choosing that. So be very deliberate on your communication objectives. The other thing, and I almost said it before the communication objective is, but we see a lot of briefs assume that you have the shopper's attention instead of designing for it. And so briefs will jump into the story to be told and not have as part of the brief, hey, I need to be noticed and I need to set up this product proposition within 1 second. So that's kind of a starting point before you get into other objectives. So a lot of times briefs will jump into their messaging hierarchy before they've said, shopper, look at me, or invite someone in for consideration. So I will also tell you a very practical thing. You think about the grocery environment, there's a lot going on in there. We already said we're trying to keep it simple in the shopper's mind. So being aware of, visual contrast, blocking, clarity of visual cues, all of those things are really important. But oftentimes, clients or brands, it might make that even tougher by assessing their creative in an internal environment that just shows it by itself on a white sheet of paper, shows it on the slide. Here's what the display is going to look like. And not only are they pressure testing it with even mocking it up in situation, they're not even talking about it. I'm going, okay, where do we expect this to be placed? We've got a very unique message on the left side. Is it common for us to be sandwiched with other displays? How well does this display do if the header doesn't get attached to it, which happens in operations? So pressure testing for the environment is really important. We often find that that's skipped.
Yeah, I think we've all seen displays, as you said, in grocery stores where they haven't left room for pricing, or they expect, as you said, the whole message to be seen, and it's maybe coming over an aisle and you only see a snippet. So it creates confusion, creates issues, and we've designed this perfect thing that then shoppers have no idea what it is because we've not designed it for the right context.
Well, absolutely. And the classic never seen, never sold is really true in those powerful things. The whatever you're using to be seen, make sure it's deliberate. And what we look for in our process is not only can you get someone's attention and invite them in, but have you set up your product proposition? Is the thing that's getting their attention, is it the kind of the on-ramp you want in a very logical way to be compelling and immediate in that context?
Yeah, so I think context and framing are really important concepts that hopefully our listeners will take away and can start using today. Are there, I have to imagine you've seen thousands of different creative pieces from probably hundreds of brands. Are there examples where perhaps a slight shift in framing that could be driving urgency, context, or motivation that materially change shopper behaviors in a way that, sort of traditional consumer advertising wouldn't?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And we've kind of referenced a few of them right here. You mentioned urgency on it, and that's whether it's the urgency of a context usage, whether it's helping you become game ready on what you're doing. For an example, that's really relevant these days. A New Year reset that we have, where we're taking use of that urgency you have. There's also different ways on framing things that might work with the scarcity effect. Whenever we see something that's limited time, right, that sets up that it's a special moment. It's worth talking on the power of new right here. I mean, we as humans actually have a need for new. We see the word new and we release a little dopamine in our bodies, and especially for those categories that have a low trial hurdle. When you're able to leverage new, say it. Don't be as worried about blending it into your brand equities or using your color. Shout new. Okay, and that way you can kind of break through and you actually tap into a little bit of a framing that you might have there. So immediacy, context, relevance in the moment are all of those small framing things that we can do. Visualization, showing the usage occasion, and utilizing the concept of mirroring. That's when someone sees an image and kind of follows it in their own pattern. I think about, when you're feeding a baby a spoon of food, and we open our mouth. That is behavioral science right there on mirroring. You can do the same thing with effective visuals about showing a context, a usage situation, and folks, consciously going to go, or subconsciously go, that I want that. I want that experience. I want that moment.
Yes, kind of seeing yourself in that situation of, hey, what a great family moment at Thanksgiving. That's what I want. I'm going to stock up with everything that's on that display because I'm making, whether I'm mentally making that connection or actually making that connection. Kind of like you said, the mirroring, the context plays a significant role.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go back to something that you said earlier. So the context, the framing, as you said, super important. But if you don't get noticed, and I think you said 1 second, right? If you don't get noticed from the beginning, whether that's in store or online, you've got an issue. You mentioned maybe a couple things in passing, but would really like to hone in and answer for our listeners. Like, what are some techniques to ensure that shoppers will pay attention and your brands are noticed in store or online?
Great. Well, I think super question. I mean, one of the things right out of the gate is be context aware. So, and recognize that you're not operating in a vacuum on that. So we talked about evaluation on the white sheet of paper. Make sure you kind of torture test yourself in context. There are a few natural things that any brand can do right out of the gate is try to ease that cognitive load by presenting your information in a way that the shopper would naturally want to engage with it. So what am I saying there? When we look at key visuals or items like that, and we're going to have, an important visual, or we're going to have that new burst. Well, that left side or even top left side for the new is a great place to start, as a framework. And that's because we've been trained in Western cultures over time. We kind of start here and glide down to the bottom right. So one of the tricks right out of the gate is utilizing that top left as an important starting point and making sure you've got it where your eyes naturally fall ideally. So, on some elements, some displays, we might be up higher on, obviously you got the mobile environment, but that top left orientation point is really important. Utilize a visual wherever you can, a captivating visual. And we talk about visuals so much and ease of processing, and it's easy to find some numbers and claims on the internet machine about how much faster, but it is a lot faster. But it has to be a great visual. Okay, it's not just a visual. It's a visual that's going to set up your product proposition. And what do I mean by that? It might set up usage. It might set up the emotional joy you get from the consumption of it. It might be the family moment. It might be that game time. But you're visualizing something that is relevant and easy to understand in a moment. And then when you get down to sort of making your close right here, That bottom right corner is really important with if that lily pad exercise of what action do I want the shopper to take now, whether it might be scan this, click here, or buy now. Make sure you use that moment in order to take advantage of it. All of those things are ways to get noticed. One other that I'll toss out that's kind of an in-store relevant one is, and it's about context, but if you picture yourself walking down an aisle, and we work with a lot of shelf signs and items like that, little banners that you might have against it. A lot of times things are unintentionally camouflaged. They might be utilizing the color of the brand, or it's the color that's prevalent in the category, and it just kind of blends in with shoppers going in. Even a simple framing. What a low-tech way to kind of define and give a little three-dimensional aspect that causes something to pop. So all of those are little guides. I don't even call them tricks. They're just things that work from a behavioral science standpoint and help things stand out more to the subconscious mind that's walking through any kind of environment or in any kind of shopping moment.
That's great. And I think we've probably all seen the ads online or in digital where that button is moved to the left side before the messaging, and it just kind of throws you off. It's like, well, that's not where that's supposed to be, and like you worry about the construct as opposed to the message.
Absolutely.
So it makes a big difference.
It's a great point. I mean, play to what natural habits already exist, amongst the shopper, and don't try to reinvent them in your layouts and communications. Sometimes it's nice to kind of glide in that lane, make it easy to process, and leverage where people want to naturally go or search. And then have great messaging, have great visualization, recognize, get that notice first before you go into the depth of your story.
Yeah. So you talked about visualization. I know one of the tenets of good messaging is make sure that you're talking about your product benefit as well as showing the product benefit. You talk about like how and why you should visualize the benefit, not just talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's really important. I mean, show the shopper what you want them to do or what you intend for them to do. And benefit visualization isn't just limited to functional benefits. And I'm not saying push it all the way to the emotional end, but if you're trying to show a moment of someone luxuriating in a taste of chocolate, communicate that emotional satisfaction, of what you're doing it. If you're trying to show something that's going to be great for school lunches, show how it might fit into that context, either whether it's happy kid or happy parent that's found a solution here, and they know that this product fits in that context you intend for them.
Makes sense. So we've talked about a lot of, I don't want to say tips and tricks, because you said they're really not tips and tricks, they're best practices. But if you had to give three principles, actionable principles that our listeners could apply this quarter, and I know we're sort of getting to the end of the quarter, to improve shopper messaging using behavioral science, what would they be?
Okay. We're having to narrow it down a lot. There's a lot of good right out there, but we'll do the lifeboat drill here. I'd say we referenced this one earlier, how brands can make a mistake of trying to tell their story before they got the attention. So I'd say the first thing right out of the gate is design for attention before persuasion. Okay, so be seen and then be relevant. Part of being relevant is, and this would be the second recommendation, is reduce the cognitive load. Be as simple as you can. No simpler, but be as simple as you can. Because your brain, everyone's brain, your shopper, our brains, are trying to simplify our lives and maintain our energy, and they don't want to overinvest. So you make it where they have to overinvest energy, they're going to pull back. So design for attention before persuasion. Reduce that cognitive load. Make it simpler. Prioritize your messaging, and then finally, anchor to some immediate context. I in the shopping environment, wherever it is, there's this transition from consumer to shopper. When we're talking to a consumer as a brand, we want to get into his heart. What we're doing the shopper is we want to get in the cart. And so anchoring that choice, at the moment in some context of immediacy really helps, whether it's usage occasion or why buy now. So attention before processing, keep the cognitive load as simple as you can, and then have some contextual immediacy on why now.
Awesome. Well, Lynn, this has been a very rich conversation, a great, powerful blend of science and insight to help creative and making sure that we're designing with the shopper in mind. So, but before we close, one last question. You talked at the very end there about getting in the cart. So, talk about, hey, how do you help brands close the deal?
Yeah, it's really it is kind of a continuum on doing it. And so when we have a metric in our algorithms that looks at how well is something closing. And when we think about closing, we all kind of instinctively go, all right, we obviously need to close the sale. Maybe we have a sale, maybe we have a promotion, maybe we have everything like that. Those are important. But we talk about our assessment process as going on linearly, and we start with commanding attention. That's the starting point. And what I'd have folks do is, if you want to help you close the most right out of the gate, is make sure you get their attention, and think of that as the sales funnel. And so if I've gotten their attention, I've broadened my sales funnel. If I've not done a good job of doing that, even if I have a great story, I have a great closing element, I've literally reduced my sales funnel. So get that out of the gate, then be choiceful throughout. And what we'll assess in close is, do we have a strong closing element? That might be benefit visualization. It might be a claim. It might be an urgency. It could be social proof. There are all kinds of ways you can have great claims. But we'll also assess how well have we done, where we've gotten the shopper where they've paid attention and we've gotten them to that closing moment. So think of it holistically. Have a great closing element, but really get back to saying, hey, have we earned their attention out of the gate? Have we invited them into our product proposition?
It reminds me of the famous Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you never take. So it sounds like, you can only close 100% of the shoppers that you get their attention.
Exactly. Get them engaged, and then have a simple, compelling story to tell, and you'll win more often than not.
Yeah. So speaking of close, thanks for your time today, Lynn.
Oh, you bet.
Very much appreciated. If folks want to learn more about behavioral science or about Sellcheck, how can they reach you?
Oh, sure. Feel free to reach me directly. That would be Lynn, that's LYNN .Neal, that's NEAL, at sellcheck.com, or just go to sellcheck.com and you'll find all the information, and you can see what we do, how we do it, and reach out and contact, including me directly.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. So for our listeners, if you found today's conversation valuable, please subscribe, leave a review. Obviously, consider sharing this episode for somebody who works in retail marketing or shopper insights. So until next time, I'm Michael La Kier, and this was Shopper Matters.
Thanks for joining the Shopper Matters podcast. If you liked this episode, please subscribe so you'll automatically receive new episodes as they are released.